Hello there, Mad Mike here, and welcome back to the channel. And today we're going to be talking about the Highlander reboot. Now, this is coming out of Lionsgate. This has been in kind of development hell for a number of years. There really wasn't too much of a push to get it off the ground initially, and I think what wound up happening is they kind of moved on from certain things because originally I think Dave Bautista was attached to this to play the Kurgan and like a few other things, but eventually all of them kind of wound up dropping out as this thing kind of delved below. But recently it's kind of come back up, and probably because a lot of studios are starved for content right now, and they're looking for anything they can to kind of help out in certain ways. So this was probably sitting around. Now, the director of this film, before we get to the more recent news, now I apologize if I mispronounced this name horribly. Chad Stileski, and here's the thing with him that doesn't make me hate this choice is that he's directed all of the John Wick films. He will be directing the fourth John Wick film. He's also set to be a director on the Ghost of Tsushima movie. He is also set to be a director on a few other films that are coming up as well that are also being worked on by him and the two writers that are also attached to the film, which are Ryan J. Condal and Kerry Williamson. Kerry Williamson in particular has been working on a lot of sword and sorcery stuff as of late. Actually, sorry, I stand corrected. That is the other writer, the other writer of this project, Ryan Condal, because he is currently working on the House of Dragons, Game of Thrones spinoff for HBO. He's also done some other films that I don't know if I'd put high up on a pedestal. Rampage and the Dwayne Johnson Hercules film. Neither of those, I believe, made a big dent at the box office. Rampage might have initially, but Rampage is kind of a guilty pleasure movie for me. I don't really mind it that much because I know how stupid it has to be, but it is at least kind of entertaining, especially with the finale. But aside from that, that's really the only fantasy stuff that I kind of see in here. Now, like I said, the writer knows how to do action. He knows how to do action in multiple facets, whether that is with firearms or whether that is with swords. And in this scenario, this would be probably mostly with swords, although I could see guns coming into play because a lot of it is supposed to take place in modern day. If they're going with the same balance as the first movie have had, where part of the film took place in like 14th century Scotland, I believe, and the other half took place in 1980s New York. So that I don't know if they're going to go with the duality with that, but I don't mind the director. The writers, there's definitely some fantasy stuff there, but the thing is that the director knows how to do good action. And that's really what I'm looking for here is the thing that's the best in a Highlander movie is the sword play. You know, if you have these outrageous sword moments and stuff like that, and decapitations and things like that, then you can make at least an entertaining film from an action standpoint. Now, whether there's going to be an accompanying story to that that is good enough to complement it, that is an entirely other question, because we kind of had that in Mortal Kombat too, where the action was really good, but the story was eh. So the only other thing that's really there to talk about with this is the big news that we got the other day, which is that Henry Cavill has been cast as a lead character in the Highlander reboot, and we did get confirmation of that, I believe, from either directly from Lionsgate or from his own Twitter handle. So basically, as far as I can tell, they're probably getting him to play Connor MacLeod. He's an English actor. I assume he could swing the Scottish accent pretty easily, and they didn't really give that much of a shit about accents in the original anyway, because they had a Swedish man playing a Scottish guy, and a Scottish guy playing an Egyptian person who was also a Spaniard, and a very large American man playing, I think, a Russian, technically, even though the Kurgan really never speaks with an accent. I mean, a little bit of one, but not that much of one. But the thing that kind of always bugged me about trying to do a reboot of Highlander is they've been trying to push Highlander as a franchise for many, many years. They had a relatively successful television show and the first movie. Aside from that, every other attempt that they've done to really kind of turn this thing into a moneymaker has been for naught. It has been a complete flop. All the sequels to the original Highlander movie were not good. Even the movies that they did after the television series, which are really more made for TV movies, those all pretty much sucked. There was a lot going on there that just didn't really make a whole lot of sense. They were bad films. They were terribly written, especially the second one. But the TV show is a little bit of a saving grace, even though I really don't care that much for the TV show. I know a lot of people that do, or at least enjoyed it to an extent, and I think that's okay. Like the television show is serviceable for what it is, and the first movie is amazing. I love the first film, but the thing about the first film is it was very much written as a contained narrative. There was not really much room at the end of it built for kind of an open-ended thing where you can make a bunch of sequels out of it. Now, what I think they're probably going to wind up doing with this film, because this is supposed to be a quote-unquote reboot of everything, is that they're going to leave it as open-ended as possible so that way you have an opportunity for sequels. The studio will most likely demand it, because when you're making a movie like this, they're planning on making this into a franchise most likely. So if you're going down that route, then you have to leave some kind of a catch at the end where there's something that they can explore that's more than that, instead of trying to forcefully make something up like they did with the original second film. But the other kind of thing that I don't really like about rebooting Highlander is that Highlander was very much kind of it was lightning in a bottle at the time. When it came out, and I believe the original film came out in 1985 or 86, one of the two. I think it was 85. That film was very much different than a lot of the fantasy films that had been put onto screen up to that point. You had stuff like Star Wars, which had a lot of sword play. You had some other fantasy movies at the time that were a bit more leaned toward the fantasy. You had stuff like Legend or Krull, or Willow was actually, I think, right after this. And you had all those that kind of leaned in heavily into the fantasy. And this, it kind of was neo-real fantasy. Like, the only real fantasy part of the whole thing was the immortals. Everything else was pretty much normal. You still had normal people. It was still depicted as kind of a normal thing, a normal, well, so as normal as New York was in the 80s. And then when they have the depictions of the past, it's fairly, they try to remain at least fairly accurate to what was available at the time, even though a lot of what you see in the past is really just, sword play and really just Connor McLeod's relationship with his first love, which was Heather, or his second love, technically, because the first one shunned him and smashed him in the head and kicked him out of the village. But that's the other thing, too, is that I think Henry Cavill is too big to play that role. And when I say that, I don't necessarily mean big as in popularity. I mean big as in physical size. Christopher Lambert, when you see the original film and you see Christopher Lambert fighting with the Kurgan, it's legitimately nail-biting because Connor McLeod is so much smaller than him. Not just, and they use camera angles to make that even more apparent, because Clancy Brown is a large man. He is a very large man, especially back then. He was basically a stunt man that they gave kind of that had halfway decent acting chops. But he was legitimately intimidating because of that size difference. Henry Cavill is a massive dude. It's like, oh, you're gonna sword fight against Superman? Oh, you're gonna get your ass kicked, dude. Like that's the idea when you're watching it, or when I'm thinking about watching it. Is like, you should have gotten somebody that was toned, that was muscular, but that was of smaller size physically. Somebody. I dare I say somebody. Well, no, it would have to be taller than Tom Cruise, because Tom Cruise is insane, and so you don't want him anywhere near any kind of production you're doing. But if you would like, you can. There are actors that you can get in Hollywood that would be toned up enough to do it, and then you reserve the massive dude for the Kurgan, because that guy is supposed to be jacked out of his mind and huge. A guy like that, if you actually were going to get a guy, okay, Dave Bautista, I could see that because he was a former wrestler. He's a very large man. You could go with you could look at some other former wrestlers too. I mean, I was going to say maybe John Cena, but he's more of a comedian now than he is anything else, so I'd maybe stay away from that. Dwayne Johnson would probably cost way too much money for them at this point. That's the other thing too, is that some people mentioned to me like, oh, well, they didn't specify the role, so he could play the Kurgan. It's like, yeah, but if you're putting all that money forward to get Henry Cavill in a role at this point, you're probably going to be paying him to be your front man. Because the only other instance of him being a supporting actor was, I think, in that Mission Impossible movie he did recently. Anyway, was that Mission Impossible movie he did where he was filming at the Mustache Gate thing, and that was kind of before he kind of hit this new stride he's had with The Witcher, and now the Snyder Cut and some other stuff that he's doing as well. So I think that at this point in time, it would have cost them way too much money to cast him in a supporting role. I'm kind of shocked they got Sean Connery to do the original one, but that was also in the mid '80s when his career was kind of meh. It was before Hunt for Red October and before a lot of other things that kind of revamped his career through the early to mid '90s. But regardless of that, I don't really. Here's my problem with this. All the choices they're making, I like. I just don't like the idea that they're remaking Highlander. So it's kind of a weird conniption thing. But regardless of that, I want to know what you think. Would you be excited for a Highlander reboot? Would you not? Do you like the director, the writers, Henry Cavill being cast in it? Or are you kind of with me where you think it's kind of a pointless thing because of all that they've done before this? Put your thoughts in the comments below. As usual, I like to read them. Hit the bell for notifications, hit the like button, subscribe, and remember, I live my life free of compromise. Do you?